Let me ask you something. If I put two deals in front of you, one is a 20 unit for $400,000 in a market that's been declining for years, and the other is a 10 unit for $700,000 in a growing, healthy submarket, which one would you pick? Most new investors go straight for the cheaper one. They see that lower price tag and they think, man, this is my shot. I'm getting it for less money and I can't lose. But here's the hard truth. Cheap doesn't mean good. In real estate, cheap usually means there's a reason. It might look like a good deal on paper, but what you're really buying is the market that building sits in. And if that market's sick, the deal will bleed you dry. Look, I've seen this mistake wreck people. Investors buy in the wrong neighborhoods, in a declining city, in an anti-landlord market, and all because the numbers look sexy in a spreadsheet. And guess what? 6 months later, they're buried in vacancies, struggling with tenants, and getting calls from brokers trying to help them unload the same property they swore was going to make them rich. This is one of those mistakes that doesn't just cost you money, it costs you years. That's why in this episode, we're going to break down exactly why ignoring local market fundamentals is one of the fastest ways to lose in multifamily, and how to make sure you never fall for a cheap deal that ends up being the most expensive lesson of your career. When investors are new, they tend to chase numbers instead of context. They spend hours obsessing over cap rate, cash-on-cash returns, and pro formas, but they completely overlook the foundation underneath those numbers, the market itself. I've had people send me deals saying, Paul, this one is amazing. It's a 9% cap rate, only $30,000 a door. And I'll ask, okay, well, where is it? Then they say something like, it's in a small town 3 hours outside of anywhere. Look, I'm not knocking small towns, but here's the problem. If the area has been losing jobs for years, if the population's shrinking, if the only major employer just shut down, or if the city is cracking down on landlords, that's 9% cap rate. It's fiction. It's just bait. And the reason so many new investors fall for it is because they're comparing it to prices in markets like Las Vegas or Phoenix or Dallas, and they're thinking they've found a bargain. But real estate isn't sold like retail. It's sold like a business. If the income stream isn't secure, the discount isn't a deal. It's a warning. I learned early as a broker that every property has two stories. The one written on the flyer and the one the market is actually telling you. The wannabes only read the flyer. The pros, they read the market. I'll give you a real example. A few years back, I had a buyer who found what they thought was a real steal. A 16 unit out of state. The property itself looked great. It was a brick building, solid roof, fully leased. Long-term tenants. He got it under contract at a price that was half of what he'd pay in Vegas. On paper, it looked like a home run. But here's what he didn't look at. The city had been losing population for 5 years straight. The major employer had moved to another state. Crime was creeping up. And because the town's economy was drying up, the tenant base had actually shifted. Most of the residents left were low income or transient renters who were struggling to pay consistently. He bought it anyways, convinced that he would turn it around. And guess what? 6 months later, occupancy had dropped 60%. Rents weren't being paid. The tenants that stayed weren't taking care of their units. He was flying out constantly to deal with management issues and paying for it out of pocket. By the end of the first year, he wasn't managing a property, he was managing a problem. That's what happens when you ignore local fundamentals. The property doesn't care how optimistic you are. The market decides whether your deal works, not a spreadsheet. So what do I actually mean when I say local market fundamentals? It's the heartbeat of the area. It's everything that gives your property value beyond the bricks and paint. Here's what I look for. First, job and population growth. Jobs are the oxygen of your property. If employers are hiring and people are moving in, that's a tailwind. If businesses are closing and people are moving out, that's a death spiral. Second is supply and demand. Are there new developments coming online, or is the city built out with stable demand? Oversupply can crush rent growth faster than any bad tenant. If a bunch of shiny new Class A buildings are coming up around your C-Class property, you better know how that affects your rent roll. Third is income trends. You want to be in the areas where wages are rising, not stagnating. Because if incomes can't keep up with rent, eventually your growth hits a ceiling. Fourth is landlord laws and regulations. Now, I can't stress this enough. You have to understand how the local government treats landlords. Some states and cities make it nearly impossible to evict problem tenants, raise rents, or even charge late fees. You'll spend your life feeding lawyers instead of your mortgage. Fifth is crime and livability. Nobody wants to live in fear. You don't need perfection, but safety does matter. Tenants pay for peace of mind. If they don't feel safe, they leave. And finally, infrastructure and amenities. Good schools, nearby employers, shopping, public transit, hospitals, parks. These are demand anchors. They attract stable tenants and support longer and stronger rents. Here's the big picture. The property you buy is just a snapshot. The market fundamentals tell you what that picture will look like 5 years from now. So, how do you actually analyze a market before you buy? Start with migration and job data. You can find this in the census reports or local economic development sites and business journals. Look for trends, not just current stats, but movement over time. Are jobs up or down? Is population growing or is it shrinking? Then drive the market. Seriously, you got to put boots on the ground. You can learn more from a weekend visit than 100 spreadsheets. Talk to property managers, talk to tenants, talk to contractors. Ask them what's really happening. Are rents rising? Are good tenants easy or hard to find? Visit the local city planning office or their website. Are there new employers coming in? Are there major projects breaking ground? Are there policy changes on the horizon? And here's a trick I've used for years. Talk to mail carriers, trash collectors, and delivery drivers. They know the truth about an area. They'll tell you which streets are getting worse and which are getting better. That kind of intel doesn't show up in a data set, but it can make or break your deal. The pros do this work. The wannabes, they skip it. And that's why one group builds portfolios, why the other one keeps making excuses on why they can't find good deals. When you buy in a strong market, everything works with you instead of against you. You don't have to push as hard to fill vacancies. Tenants wind up staying longer because they have jobs and stability. Rents rise naturally with demand. And banks love lending in those areas, which makes refinancing a whole heck of a lot easier. And here's the crazy part. Even if you make small mistakes along the way, the strength of the market will often bail you out. On the flip side, when you buy in a weak market, you can do everything right and still lose. You can renovate perfectly, you can manage the place tightly, you can market your units aggressively, but if people are leaving the city, or if the laws are stacked against landlords, or if the local economy is flatlined, you're swimming upstream. That's why smart investors say, I'd rather buy an average property in a great market than a great property in a bad one, because the market does most of the heavy lifting. So here's the big takeaway. Before you fall in love with the deal, fall in love with the market. Because when the market is strong, average deals perform. When the market's weak, even perfect deals fail. You gotta study the fundamentals like job growth, population trends, income, legislation, supply. You gotta build your buy box around markets that support your goals. That's how you build wealth that lasts. Not just a property portfolio, but a real business that thrives through cycles. Now I wanna hear from you. What's one market you're watching right now and why? Drop it in the comments. I want to see where you guys are looking and maybe give you some feedback. And don't forget, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series. Now, like this video so more investors get this message before they make the same mistake. And stay tuned because in the next episode, we're tackling the mistake that wipes people out even after they buy right, renovate right, and manage right. Not having an exit or contingency plan. And that one is a big one.